The desert does not hide secrets. It hides evidence of a crime seen so vast that the human mind has been trained for millennia to look directly at it and see nothing. We walk upon the petrified remains of an era that the official record, the sanitized, scrubbed timeline of the Canons of Men, demands we forget. But look at the dust. Look at the foundations of the world's oldest cities, where stones weighing 1,200 tons were moved with a precision that mocks our current physics. If the mountains we climb are merely the petrified remains of a biology we weren't meant to remember, what else is hiding in plain sight? We are told a story of slow, linear progress, of hunter-gatherers graduating to bronze and iron, but the archival evidence suggests a terrifying deviation. We are living in the aftermath of a genetic heist. This is not a collection of stories to be told by a campfire. This is a documented testimony of a planetary occupation. The files have been suppressed, the witnesses silenced, and the biological anomalies buried under the weight of 1,000-year censorship. We are reopening the cold case of the Nephilim. We are looking at the era when the veil between the celestial and the terrestrial was not just thin, but torn wide open by entities who viewed the human genome as a laboratory. The official narrative is a comfortable cage. It tells us that our ancestors were primitive, that their descriptions of giants and sky beings were the hallucinations of a pre-scientific mind trying to explain the wind and the stars. They call it the dawn of civilization. They tell us that the Great Pyramids and the trilithons of Baalbek were the result of thousands of slaves with copper chisels and hemp ropes. But do you really believe that? Does the math of the safe story actually add up when you are standing before a block of granite that a modern heavy lift crane cannot even budge? The mainstream doctrine functions as a containment field, designed to keep the human psyche from realizing its own status as a survivor of a cosmic industrial accident. They have erased the truth of the giants not because it is too strange, but because it is too dangerous. To admit that giants walked the earth is to admit that our history was once hijacked by a non-human intelligence, and that the gods of our ancestors were actually biological invaders with a mastery of genetic engineering that we are only now beginning to replicate in our clandestine laboratories. But in the Forbidden Scrolls, a different report was filed. The Book of Enoch, found in the caves of Qumran, does not speak of gods or spirits in the abstract. It speaks of the Watchers. It chronicles a precise historical event, the descent of 200 high-ranking celestial officers onto the peak of Mount Hermon. This was not a spiritual visitation. It was a military defection. These entities, led by Semyaza and Azazel, didn't come to save humanity. They came to harvest it. The archived testimony states they looked upon the daughters of men and saw them as compatible biological vessels. This was the first breach. This was the moment the human template was corrupted. They didn't just bring forbidden knowledge of metallurgy, cosmetics, and astrology. They brought a foreign DNA. The result of this union was the Nephilim, the fallen ones. These were not mere tall men. The Dead Sea Scrolls describe them as monstrosities whose height and hunger were unsustainable for the Earth's natural ecosystem. They were the apex predators of a nightmare world, consuming the labor of men, then the men themselves, and finally, turning their insatiable hunger toward the animal kingdom, crossing species in a frenzy of genetic lawlessness. Let us examine the first piece of evidence in this cosmic investigation: the architecture of the impossible. In the ancient city of Baalbek, Lebanon, the Temple of Jupiter sits atop a foundation that predates the Romans by thousands of years. This foundation contains the trilithon, 3 massive stones weighing over 800 tons each. Even more shocking is the stone of the south nearby, a single block weighing 1,200 tons. There is no tool in the archaeological record of the civilized world that can account for this. Why are the foundations of our oldest cities built for occupants 5 times our size? If we were the ones building these sites, why did we build them to a scale that renders us insignificant? The archival reports found in the Book of Jasher suggest these structures were not temples to deities, but fortifications and palaces for a ruling class of giants who viewed the human population as livestock. The paradox is clear. Either our ancestors possessed technology that has been completely erased from the physical record, or they were not the architects. The secret detail from the Apocrypha is that the giants used words of power and resonance to move these stones. a technology of frequency that the Watchers gifted to their hybrid offspring to solidify their dominion over the physical realm. The second investigation leads us into the dark heart of the genetic records. The Book of Jasher, a text mentioned twice in the official biblical canon but largely removed from public consumption, contains a chilling detail. The sons of men taught the mixture of animals of one species with the other, in order therewith to provoke the Lord. This was the dawn of the chimera. The Nephilim weren't content with polluting the human line. They were rewriting the entire biological code of the planet. When you look at the ancient depictions of griffins, sphinxes, and minotaurs, you are not looking at artistic flourish. You are looking at the biological police reports of a world where genetic boundaries had been dissolved. The Dead Sea Scrolls, specifically the Book of Giants, mentions the giants having dreams of a great forest being leveled, leaving only 3 roots. This was a psychic warning of the coming purge. The giants knew their time was limited, yet they continued to accelerate their hybridization program. Why would they do this? Because they were trying to create a biological vessel that could withstand the higher frequencies of their fathers, the Watchers, while remaining anchored in the physical density of Earth. They were trying to build a body that could house a fallen celestial consciousness permanently. The third investigation takes us to the names themselves. In the Book of Giants, we find the names of these entities: Mawe, Ohia, and Haya. These are not human names. They are linguistic echoes of a lineage that was never meant to take root here. The scrolls describe these giants as having a voraciousness that led to the total collapse of the environmental order. They were eating all that the earth produced. And then they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. This is the documented testimony of a planetary parasite. The giants were not a race in the traditional sense. They were a biological weapon system. If you look at the skeletal remains found in the mounds of North America in the 19th century, 7, 9, 12-foot skeletons with double rows of teeth and 6 fingers, you see the remnants of this failed experiment. Why did the Smithsonian Institution reportedly take possession of these remains only for them to vanish into the private archives? If these are merely anomalies, why the systematic erasure? Is it because the presence of a 6-fingered giant in the historical record confirms the testimony of the Book of Samuel, which describes a giant of Gath with the same polydactyly? The consistency of the evidence is the very thing that Canons of Men cannot allow. The fourth investigation focuses on the Rephaim, the shadows of the giants who survived or returned after the initial purge. History tells us that the giants were wiped out by the flood, but the documented testimony of the Hebrew scouts in the Book of Numbers tells a different story. We saw the Nephilim there, and we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. How did the giants reappear? Was it a second descent of the Watchers, or was the genetic corruption carried through the Ark itself, hidden in the DNA of one of the survivors? The archives hint at the kings of the East, the Rephaim, the Emim, and the Anakim. These were the remnants, the warlords who held the high ground and built the Cyclopean walls. King Og of Bashan, according to the Book of Deuteronomy, had an iron bedstead over 13 feet long. This isn't a tall tale, it is a logistical record. Why would a king need a bed of iron? Perhaps because a bed of wood could not support the sheer density and weight of a Nephilim's physiology. The paradox here is that the giants didn't just disappear. They were hunted into extinction by a human population that had finally been given the tools to fight back. The fifth investigation brings us to the abyss, the prison of the Watchers. The Book of Enoch states that the fathers of the giants were bound in the valleys of the earth until the day of judgment. If the perpetrators of this genetic crime are still here, held in a state of suspended animation beneath our feet, what happens when we begin to dig too deep? From the massive tunnels of the Large Hadron Collider to the deepest mines in the world, are we inadvertently breaking the seals of the ancient archives? The secret detail from the Apocrypha is that the giants' physical bodies died, but their spirits, the bastard spirits, were cursed to roam the earth as disembodied entities. They are the demons of the ancient world, the disincarnate intelligence that seeks to reclaim a physical form. If you are beginning to see the cracks in the manufactured reality they've built around you, join our collective archive of suppressed history by subscribing to this investigation. The climax of this chronicle is the reset. The Great Flood was not an act of divine anger, in the way a human feels anger. It was a surgical decontamination. The planetary laboratory had become so infested with hybrid DNA, so choked with the corruption of all flesh, that the original human template was on the verge of total extinction. The flood was the only way to save the seed of humanity. Noah is described as being perfect in his generations. In the original archival language, this doesn't mean he was a good man in a moral sense. It means his DNA was uncorrupted. He was genetically pure, one of the last few who hadn't been touched by the Watcher hybridization program. The flood was a hard reboot of the system, an attempt to drown the monstrosities and seal the abyss. It was a biological reset designed to reclaim the earth for the human lineage. But as we look at the world today, the shadows are returning. We are entering the era of the second reset. What the Watchers did with biology in the days of Enoch, we are now doing with silicon and CRISPR. We are once again teaching the mixture of species. We are once again reaching for the forbidden knowledge of the heavens. If the mountains are the graves of giants, and the ruins are the footprints of an occupation, then our current trajectory is a mirror image of the world before the flood. We are reopening the files. We are looking for the giants not in the mounds of the past, but in the laboratories of the future. The warning is written in the stone and the scrolls. When the genetic boundaries are dissolved, the reset is inevitable. The giants never truly died. They are simply waiting for the gates to open once more. The suppression of this biological reality was not an accident of time. It was a coordinated tectonic shift in human perception. If you look at the 19th century archives of the American Midwest, you find hundreds of documented reports from local newspapers, the New York Times, the Scientific American, the San Antonio Express, detailing the discovery of giant humanoid remains within the burial mounds of the Adena and Hopewell cultures. These weren't indigenous ancestors as we understand them today. These were biological anomalies, 7 to 12 feet tall, with massive jawbones that could fit over the face of a large modern man, and the recurring, chilling signature of the Nephilim lineage, the double rows of teeth and the six-fingered hands. The Smithsonian Institution didn't just study these remains. They filed them away into a silence so absolute it functions as a secondary burial. Why? Because the presence of these skeletons shatters the Darwinian timeline. It proves that a separate, predatory, and highly advanced biological branch once dominated this continent. The archives suggest that these giants were the kings of the earth mentioned in the Forgotten Scrolls, the ones who survived the Great Purge by retreating into the vast cavern systems of the inner crust. Consider the Kandahar incident of 2002. While the official military reports remain classified, the testimony of the soldiers involved has leaked through the cracks of the establishment. They speak of a creature encountered in the mountains of Afghanistan, a red-haired giant, 13 feet tall, wielding a spear that could pierce a Humvee. They report that the creature had 2 rows of teeth and a smell like rotting copper. This wasn't a terrorist, it was a relic. If the mountains are not just stone, but the fortresses of a dormant biology, what happens when we wake them up? The Book of Enoch tells us that the spirits of the giants are clouds, which shall cause diseases and shall not eat, but shall be famished and thirsty and shall cause offenses. These are the shadows that the modern military-industrial complex is currently trying to weaponize. They aren't looking for oil in those mountains. They are looking for the God-King DNA. They are looking for the source code of the giants to integrate it into the next generation of enhanced soldiers. We are watching the reconstruction of the Nephilim template in real time under the guise of transhumanist progress. The paradox of the megaliths becomes even more terrifying when you apply the lens of high-frequency resonance. The forbidden archives of the Alexandrian Library, before they were supposedly lost to the flames, spoke of vibrational masonry. The giants did not lift the stones of Sacsayhuaman or the Great Pyramid with muscle alone. They used the knowledge inherited from the Watchers. They understood that matter is merely slowed-down frequency. By using sound, the voice of the heavens, they could render the heaviest granite weightless. This is why the stones at the base of the Giza Plateau are fitted so tightly that a human hair cannot pass between them. It wasn't patience or manpower. It was a technological bypass of gravity. If the Canons of Men admit this, they must admit that our ancestors were more advanced than we are, and that their teachers were not of this world. They must admit that the history of the human race is a history of regression, not progression. We are the survivors of a golden age of horror, clinging to the ruins of a civilization that viewed us as nothing more than biological batteries. Let us turn the investigation toward the curse of Canaan. After the flood, the record shows a sudden and violent reemergence of the giant tribes in the Levant. The Rephaim, the Anakim, the Zamzummim. Where did they come from? The Book of Jasher hints at a stolen archive, the Book of the Watchers, which was found by Ham, the son of Noah, and passed down to his descendants. This wasn't a book of stories. It was a manual of genetic manipulation. The giants didn't just appear again. They were resurrected through the illicit use of pre-flood biotechnology. The land of Canaan became a sprawling laboratory, a defensive perimeter designed to block the seed of the woman from reclaiming the earth. Every battle described in the ancient Hebrew texts was a tactical strike against a specific genetic outpost. These weren't tribal wars. They were a planetary sterilization program. When the scouts reported that they seemed like grasshoppers in the eyes of the giants, they were describing a psychological warfare that we still feel in our collective subconscious today, the deep ancestral fear of the old ones who ruled from the high places. If the mountains we climb are merely the petrified remains of an era we weren't meant to remember, what else is hiding in plain sight? Look at the Greenland map and the maps of Pyre Reis. They show the world as it was before the ice, or perhaps as it was viewed from an altitude that only the Watchers could achieve. The archival weight of these maps suggests a global civilization that was mapped, measured, and dominated long before the Age of Discovery. The giants were the administrators of this global grid. They built their high places on the ley lines of the Earth, using the planet's natural electromagnetic field to power their cities and their stargates. The secret detail from the Apocrypha is that the Tower of Babel wasn't a tower to reach a physical heaven. It was a gate of the gods, a particle accelerator designed to pierce the veil and allow the fallen ones back into the physical dimension. The confusion of tongues was a tactical disruption of the giants' global communication network. It was the only way to stop the second descent. The Canons of Men have done everything in their power to turn the giants into fairy tales. They have transformed the terrifying biological reality of Goliath, a man nearly 10 feet tall, wearing hundreds of pounds of bronze armor, into a moral allegory for overcoming obstacles. But look at the technical specifications of Goliath's gear. His spearhead alone weighed 15 pounds of iron. This is a military hardware report, not a metaphor. Goliath was a biological tank, a specialized heavy infantry unit produced by the Philistine hybridization program. The secret history of the world is a series of failed attempts by the Nephilim to reestablish their throne. Every empire that has risen since Rome, the British Empire, the modern superpowers, has tried to find the hidden knowledge of the giants. They send their archaeologists to find the Staff of Power or the Holy Grail, but these are just code names for the pre-flood technology that allowed the giants to rule. Why is the world obsessed with superpowered individuals in our modern media? Why do our movies constantly feature giants, titans, and hybrids who are more than human? This is not entertainment. It is predictive programming. It is the slow acclimation of the human psyche to the return of the Watcher hierarchy. We are being prepared for the third descent. The technology of CRISPR and gene editing is the modern equivalent of the forbidden knowledge given by Azazel. We are once again mixing the species. We are creating designer babies and augmented humans. We are, in essence, building the Nephilim 2.0. The truth about giants is that they were never just a threat from the past. They are the blueprint for our future. The second reset is not a theory. It is a countdown. The existential doubt begins when you realize that the institutions you trust, the universities, the museums, the government agencies, are the very ones who are guarding the gates of the Great Silence. They tell you the mounds are just burial pits for indigenous people, even when they find skeletons with 3-inch-long fangs. They tell you the pyramids were built by slaves, even when the logistics of moving those stones remain impossible for modern engineering. They are protecting the master narrative because the alternative is too terrifying to contemplate. If the giants were real, then the gods were real. And if the gods were real, then we are not the masters of our own destiny. We are the survivors of a cosmic crime, living in the wreckage of a world that was taken from us by force. The archival evidence found in the Cave of Treasures describes the world before the flood as a place of unbearable beauty and unbearable horror. The giants had created a society of such technological sophistication that they could manipulate the very elements of the earth. But this power came at the cost of the human soul. The giants viewed humanity as a subspecies, a servant race to be used and discarded. This is why the genetic purge of the flood was necessary. It wasn't cruelty. It was a rescue mission for the human genome. If the flood had not happened, there would be no pure human beings left. We would all be hybrids, mere husks for the bastard spirits of the Watchers. The Great Reset was the only way to ensure that the human lineage survived. But the sealing of the abyss was not permanent. The Book of Revelation speaks of the bottomless pit being opened in the last days, and locusts coming out that have the power to torment men. These are not insects. These are the ancient ones, the abominations that were locked away beneath the earth. The second reset is the moment when the containment field fails. As we continue to bombard the atmosphere with high-frequency radiation, as we continue to drill into the deep earth crust, as we continue to manipulate the human DNA, we are weakening the seals. We are calling them back. The giants history tried to erase is not a closed chapter. It is a recurring nightmare. The final warning is this: do not look for the giants in the clouds or in the pages of children's books. Look for them in the boardrooms of the biotech companies. Look for them in the secret military bases where they are studying non-human biologics. Look for them in the increasing polydactyly and dental anomalies appearing in the human population. The truth is not a comfort. It is a weapon. Once you see the patterns, the six-fingered hand, the double row of teeth, the cyclopean wall, the word of power, you can never unsee them. You will realize that we are living in a manufactured reality, a safe version of history that has been edited to keep us from realizing our own danger. If the mountains are the petrified remains of an era we weren't meant to remember, and the ruins are the footprints of an occupation, then the second reset is already here. The veil is thinning. The Watchers are no longer hiding in the shadows of the past. They are waiting in the light of the future. The question is not whether the giants lived. The question is, when the bottomless pit is opened and the kings of the earth return to claim their throne, whose side will you be on? Will you stand with the pure seed of humanity, or will you succumb to the siren song of the forbidden knowledge? The files are open. The testimony is clear. The giants never died. They were merely waiting for us to forget. And now they are coming home. Consider the coordinates of the crime. Mount Hermon, the site of the original defection, sits exactly on the 33rd parallel. In the modern world, this specific latitude is a recurring marker for the most significant occult and geopolitical maneuvers in history. Is it a coincidence that the United Nations maintains a buffer zone at the very summit where the Watchers swore their oath of rebellion? The archival testimony in the Book of Enoch is precise. They descended upon Ardis, which is the summit of Mount Hermon. They didn't just land, they established a beachhead. They created a portal between the dimensions of the heavens and the earth. When you look at the modern military and scientific interest in this specific geography, you are looking at an ongoing occupation. They aren't guarding a mountain, they are guarding a gate. The Canons of Men will tell you it is a strategic height for regional surveillance, but the Forbidden Scrolls suggest it is the primary extraction point for the God-King intelligence that has never truly left this sphere. If the mountains we climb are merely the petrified remains of an era we weren't meant to remember, we must look closer at the Devil's Tower in Wyoming or the Giant's Causeway in Ireland. Geologists call them volcanic basalt columns. But look at the symmetry. Look at the hexagonal patterns that mirror the cellular structure of living tissue, scaled up to a degree that defies modern biology. The archival reports of the Ancient Ones describe trees that reached the clouds, biological entities so vast that their shadows covered entire kingdoms. The silicon tree theory is not a fantasy. It is a forensic observation of a world that was once teeming with a different kind of life, a life that was leveled during the Great Purge. When the Watcher's offspring, the Nephilim, began to consume the earth, they didn't just eat the crops. They began to harvest the very essence of the planet's biological high hardware. The petrified remains we see today are the stumps of a world that was clear-cut by a predatory, non-human industry. We are walking on the corpses of a prehistoric forest that was harvested for its starfire energy. The secret metallurgy of the giants is another layer of the investigation. The Book of Enoch mentions that Azazel taught men how to make swords and knives, and how to work with antimony and beautifying of the eyebrows. Why link weapon making with cosmetics? Because both were tools of perception management and lethal force. The giants didn't just use iron, they used high-spin state elements, what the ancient Egyptians called MFKZT, or the bread of presence. This was the starfire, the white powder of gold that allowed for the manipulation of the space-time fabric. It allowed the giants to live for centuries and to possess a cognitive speed that made the human livestock appear as though they were moving in slow motion. This is the golden fleece, the holy grail, the philosopher's stone. It isn't a metaphor for spiritual enlightenment. It is a chemical recipe for biological supremacy. The Canons of Men have buried the periodic table of the giants to keep us locked in a world of heavy matter and linear time. The investigation now turns to the pineal gland. The Forbidden Scrolls suggest that the original human template possessed a third eye that could perceive the frequency of the Watchers. We were once able to see the bastard spirits for what they were, parasitic invaders. But after the flood, a secondary reset occurred within the human anatomy. The Canons of Men introduced a dietary and atmospheric protocol designed to calcify the pineal gland. By shrinking our perceptual bandwidth, they have rendered the giants invisible. They didn't disappear. We were simply made blind to them. They now operate in the ultraviolet and infrared spectrums of our reality. They are the men in black, the shadow people, the entities reported in high strangeness encounters. They are still here, walking among us, moving through the halls of power, but our biological hardware has been downgraded so we can no longer process their presence. We are the grasshoppers not just in size, but in awareness. Why did the gods of the ancient world demand blood sacrifice? If you look at the archival weight of the Aztec, Mayan, and Phoenician records, the requirement was always the same: the life force of the innocent. This wasn't religion, it was refueling. The hybrids, the Nephilim remnants, required the hormones and the lush of human suffering to maintain their physical density in our dimension. They are biological vampires. The secret history of the world is a map of where these sacrifices have occurred, from the blood-stained altars of Carthage to the modern, clandestine missing persons cases that plague our national parks. The numbers don't lie. Thousands of people vanish every year in areas associated with ancient ruins and deep cavern systems. These are the tribute harvests that have never stopped. The giants are still hungry. They have simply moved their feeding grounds into the private sector of our society. The second reset is the culmination of this cosmic heist. As the Book of Daniel states, "They shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another." This is the precise description of the hybridization 2.0 program. We are seeing it in the surge of AI, the blurring of gender, and the push for synthetic biology. The goal is to create a vessel that is neither human nor divine, but a hollow shell that can be inhabited by the kings of the East when they are released from the abyss. The modern technology of the quantum computer is not for calculation. It is for invocation. It is the new Tower of Babel, a machine built to reach into the heavens and pull the Watchers back into our physical frame. We are being told this is evolution. The archival evidence says it is replacement. If the mountains are the graves and the ruins are the evidence, then the final warning is for the pure seed. There is a reason the ancient texts emphasize the mark of the beast. It is a genetic marker. It is the final dissolving of the boundaries that makes a human being not human. Once the DNA is corrupted, you are no longer eligible for the restoration. You become part of the bastard lineage. The Canons of Men are leading the world into a biological trap, promising eternal life through silicon and gene editing, while delivering only the eternal abyss of the Watchers. The truth about giants is that they are the architects of our current civilization, and they are about to come back to collect the rent. Existential doubt is the only rational response to a reality this compromised. If the very history you were taught is a containment field, what else in your life is a fabrication? Your education, your news, your scientific consensus. It is all a security detail for the invaders. The giants didn't fail to conquer the earth. They succeeded, and then they deleted the records of their victory. They turned the planet into a managed colony and gave us the illusion of autonomy. But the secret history cannot be fully erased. It leaks out in the megaliths. It screams from the forbidden scrolls, and it is coded into the very DNA that they are currently trying to rewrite. The final bridge to the second reset is the Great Disclosure. We are being told that UAPs and non-human intelligences are a new phenomenon. They are not. They are the old ones. They are the Watchers coming back to rescue a world that they themselves have brought to the brink of collapse. It is the oldest trick in the Watcher Handbook. Create the chaos, and then provide the heavenly solution. They will come as saviors, offering technology to fix the environment and cure all diseases. But the price of their salvation will be the total surrender of the human template. They want their thrones back. They want their tithes back. And they want their livestock to welcome them with open arms. The chronicle is reaching its conclusion. The crime scene is fully mapped. The suspects are identified. The ancient forbidden manuscripts have spoken. We are at the end of the age of man and at the doorstep of the age of the Nephilim. The truth was never meant to be found, because the truth is a death sentence for the manufactured reality we inhabit. But for those who have eyes to see, the mountains are speaking. The dust is screaming, and the abyss is opening. The giants never died. They just went into the private archives of the world, waiting for the second reset to begin. The question is no longer, did they exist? The question is, are you ready for their return? Because when the king of the bottomless pit steps through the gate on Mount Hermon, the canons of men will be burned, and the secret history will become the only reality left. The investigation is not over. It is just beginning. Every mound you drive past, every monolith that defies explanation, every anomaly in the human genome is a clue. The Watchers are counting on your existential doubt to keep you paralyzed. They are counting on your mainstream doctrine to keep you blind. But the archival weight is too heavy to be ignored any longer. The tear in the veil is wide enough for us to see the cold case for what it truly is. A planetary heist that is reaching its final terrifying phase. We are the survivors. We are the witnesses. And we are the last line of defense for the pure seed of humanity. Do not look away. The giants are watching.